Years ago, I used to work for the Bureau of Land Management, and I retired from those guys. But I worked out in Winnemucca field office, and mainly with the Burning Man organization and on the Black Rock Desert Playa. That was my area that I was assigned to out there. And we keep seeing a lot of this stuff around the playa margins, cryptobiotic crust. And we noticed that on the Alpegate-Lassen Trail and also the California Trail, you would see a lot of the cryptobiotic crust. Now, cryptobiotic, crypto means hidden, and biota is life. So hidden life is what this is kind of about. I don't know what the X is in there. The Black Rock Journal was one of the, it was a thing we had when the Friends of the Black Rock High Rock started. And so that's probably the only thing I ever published about the cryptos. And when I was talking to Cecilia about she suggested I be a speaker, I said, well, I'll just talk about cryptobiotic crust, because they're really interesting in relation to historic trails. So now, here's a bunch of rocks. That pile is probably a survey station out in the desert someplace, but there's not really much, the normal person would just walk across that, not think much about that particular scene. But as you start looking closer, you start seeing stuff, and I know a lot of you have seen this stuff before. You've probably walked on it, and when you zoom in a little bit closer, you see this is cryptobiotic crust or a biological crust, biological soil. And it grows in hot deserts and cold deserts in the American West primarily. It basically from middle America west. But it's found all over the world, even in the Arctic, at the poles, in arid environments. And it's a really interesting, here out in the Black Rock Desert is some of it. Who's been on the Anza Trail? Okay, when you're out on the Anza Trail, that's a really hot desert out there. And it's been found that different species grow in different kinds of conditions. And the Anza Trail is covered by these things. But you wouldn't know it because it's really light gray. And it's easier to destroy the cryptobiotic crusts out there. A lot of times you'll find lichen and liverworts and moss growing out in arid environments. And almost always those plants are growing on top of cryptobiotic crust or biological crust. And we'll get to the significance that this has to do with historic trails and mapping trails and traces and things like that. Up on the Colorado Plateau, there's places where it's phenomenal. A cold desert. When it's on hot deserts, it's very thin and light gray. But when you get up to the cold deserts of the Colorado Plateau and other places like that, this is what it looks like. So what are we talking about here? This is a ecosystem that's in the top few millimeters of the soil. And what it does, it's a complete ecosystem in itself. You can see what it consists of. Cyanobacteria is one of the main constituents of it. It's got fungi in it, it's got algae in it. It's really interesting. And these are nitrogen fixtures. They provide the cryptobiotic crusts or biologic soils, kind of pave the way for higher order plants. Now here is near Fort, I'm a volunteer at Fort Stanton, New Mexico. And not far away from Fort Stanton is a hog ranch. There's two hog ranches. You know, the Lincoln County Wars, Lawrence Murphy and Jimmy Dolan are the two guys that caused the Lincoln County Wars. And both of those guys came to Fort Stanton as soldiers. And when they mustered out, they formed a partnership, and they were into all kinds of interesting activities, including 2 hog ranches. But here you see one of the hog ranch brothel. You see a lot of 1860s, 1870s, 1880s glass shards and other artifacts in amongst the cryptobiotic soil or the biological crust. Somebody had mentioned one of the talks where people in saloons would drink and they'd throw the bottles out and they'd break and there's piles of glass. These hog ranches around Fort Stanton are just like that. The women had dugouts where they had tents, and there's saloons and things like that. And there's just these piles of glass, whiskey and beer bottle glass all over the place. What's amazing about cryptobiotic crust is in a typical desert or arid lands environment, it's amazing how much there is. You can see by the legend, you can see by this legend here, that and that are the cryptos, or the biological crust. And so when you look at that, this is a typical plot that you would find any place in our western deserts, or arid lands, I should say. Probably from starting in Kansas west, maybe even further east. Any place where you have arid lands. There's a woman named Jane Belknap who kind of got things going in the study of cryptobiotic crusts. And when I was out in the Winnemucca field office of BLM, 1995, that time frame, 1996, 97, the U.S. Geological Survey had just basically started researching cryptos, and she was the honcho. She still does it. And so I started conversing with her. At that time, there wasn't too much known. Now, there's been lots of research by microbiologists, by people who study mushrooms and other kinds of things like that. In this PDF, you can go out wherever you live, find the cryptos with this PDF, and you can identify the species that you're dealing with, or the moss or the lichen that's growing on it. You can identify all that. I'm going to show you some examples on the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro. That's, here, the road that Oñate kind of pioneered. So why historical trail segments? Well, I asked her early on, and she was aware of historic trails. And I said, why do you think we have these cryptos specifically on trails? Why? And she says she thought it was from the geochemical impact of all those wagons and people and animals. And in the arid lands environments, you can see a lot of traces and things like that, especially the Camino Real. And I'm not sure if it was her or someone else, but they said that the geochemical impact can be as deep as 6 feet. So there's some kind of relationship between these biological crusts and that geochemical impact. Now, where the crusts do not occur is in washes. Any place the water has eroded stuff out and all that, you don't really find them. But it's interesting. You have places where there's a trail trace, and the same kind of soil that's on the trace is right over here next to it, and yet the biological crusts are only on the trail. So that's kind of intriguing. And actually, I'm not sure if any microbiologists have studied that since I last talked to her. But that's the kind of research that needs to be done by microbiologists or geomicrobiologists or ecologists, maybe students, to take a hard look at why this is going on. Of course, in a lot of airlands environments, you will find cryptos elsewhere, not just on trails, but for some reason, they seem to like to grow on the historic trail traces. All the people that have been on the Camino Real, it's the Spanish colonials. Now, this is my living history group, La Sociedad de la Entrada. I like to do long distance hiking, and our group, we've actually been walking the Camino Real. We've walked from San Elizario through El Paso to Anthony. We've walked from the Dead Dog Trailhead 10 miles to Santa Fe, and then to Los Golondrinas. Our next segment is going to be from Los Golondrinas to the Bajada and down the Bajada. We've walked from Las Cruces, what we think is the correct route, to Paraje Robledo, which is Fort Selden. So the next iteration will be from Paraje Robledo to Paraje San Diego. And after that, it's the Jornada del Muerto. That's going to be fun.
And you dress up like this to do it?
Yeah. You know what's interesting? When you dress up like this in three-quarter armor and all that, now, and you go out in the summertime, or even if the sun's out, you can cook you.
Which is
But
why I asked the question.
yeah,
You should shop at REI.
you just kind of get used to it. But when the Spanish were when they're pioneering this, and other cultures after them, the little ice age was going on. 500 period where the temperatures, it's worse in Europe than it is here, but the temperatures here are 10 degrees to 15 degrees cooler. So it's not so bad, actually. And the Spanish, these doublets, you didn't have to have armor like that. Chainmail or thick leather, they found out to be suitable. You could, or a coat of plates, which is leather with plates underneath it, worked just fine. Arrows bouncing off. See, this guy over here, this Basque Scout, has got a leather jacket on, but if you had a gorget right here, that protects this from arrows right here. And so this is out on the Camino Real. Here we are walking on the Dead Dog Trail, walking on the Camino Real to Santa Fe for 10 miles. Civil War, reproduction Civil War brogans are almost identical to the Spanish colonial shoes, almost identical. So that's what we wear. It's hard. You can purchase Spanish colonial footwear, but it is expensive. I mean, you can get a pair of Civil War brogans for about $150, but if you want Spanish colonial stuff, you have to pay $300 or $400 for a pair of shoes. Then you got this platoon of Company A, 1st Regiment, New Mexico Volunteers, Kit Carson's own, out at during the 150th anniversary of Fort Craig, which is near the Camino Real. All these guys in this photograph are also colonial Spaniards. They're just wearing a later, but it shows you the passage of people on the Camino Real, and I always seem to be doing long distance walking and infantry type stuff, so I don't have any horseback pictures or wagon pictures. It would be nice, but Here's an interesting photograph on the Camino Real. This was during the dedication of the Yos Escarpment Trailhead. And at that time, I can't remember which year it was, but a number of years ago, the Yost Trail, the Camino Real, which is a hiking trail now, was covered by cryptobiotic crust. And here it is. Now, so this is the Camino Real, and you see a nice clear trail trace right through the vegetation, the creosote. But there's no cryptobiotic crust there. When we dedicated that years ago, it was covered by cryptobiotic crust. Here's another picture. Where are the cryptos? They used to be all over this scene right here. Well, see the line of vegetation there? If you look just to the left of that, you see cryptobiotic crust, biological soil. It's all still there. You know, these, as you all know, a single trace like that may not be the whole trail. The trail, in the case of the Camino Real, can be a mile wide. A lot of historic trails are like that, where you just have different iterations, but they're basically in the same area. But you know how people are, they're like cows. They kind of like to follow one main route. So there's a lot of stuff out on the Camino Real that looks like this. And again, on the one hand, the cryptobiotic soils are paving the way for higher order plants. Theoretically, in time, these trail traces are going to be just completely covered by vegetation because of the cryptobiotic soils. This is another photograph that does have cryptos in it. It's hard to see them because there's different species, and in that PDF, the U.S. Geological Survey, they show you how to identify the different species. They have all the species that they know about now in that PDF, and all the mosses and lichens and liverworts and all that. And in some places on the Camino Real, we have two different species right next to each other. I think I've got a photograph that's going to show that. And it's really interesting. Sometimes you can see it really well, and sometimes you can't. But what's going on here is the cryptos. So you got the geochemical impact, and you can see the trace fairly well. This is a pretty good trace right here. So they're paving the way for higher order plants. At the same time, the cryptos are protecting the trace because they are locking the soil together and stabilizing the situation. So this is a way that you can possibly identify the authenticity of a trace. So you're out looking for something, where is it at? We know we've mapped this here and all that, but all of a sudden we can't find it. So what do? We start looking for the cryptos and see if they show up as a pattern. And a lot of times they do. Near Socorro, Arroyo de la Parida, I'm going to show you some examples here. The arroyo is cut right across the Camino Real. And in this photograph here, the trail goes up, and it goes over here, and it goes up on top of that ridge and off in that direction to the north. Up there, looking back towards the coral, we see the trail, the Camino Real right there, a really good trace. Right over here is another part, and you can see pieces that go out like that. That's a modern road over there, which is, that modern road comes like that, comes like this, but the Camino Real comes like that, comes across, comes over, comes up, and comes along this ridge right here. And one thing I need a little bit of help here. I'm going to show you something. In a second, I'm going to get to that spot right there. I need a little bit of help for you who map the trails on how to identify something. A friend of mine and I went up there to take a look at things, and this part of the Camino Real up on that ridge has become a two-track road. It's not a swale. It's not a trace because the off-road vehicle community are using this part of it. See those right there? That's Gordy Hill Off-Highway Vehicle Recreation Area, BLM. And you would think that BLM would try to do something, and I was one of them working there, trying to protect the trails. Some of these off-highway vehicle trails right there are community real pathways, but the off-road vehicle people are on them. And here they've gotten up on this. And also maybe in the 1920s or 30s, there was motorized traffic on this segment right here. But Arroyo de la Prida has some really intact stuff. Right over there is this picture here, looking back to where we just were. We're up there taking photographs back in this direction here, back to the southwest, and this is looking northeast. In this picture, there are cryptobiotic soils, or cryptobiotic crusts, and they're right in here. You can hardly see them. The off-road vehicle community has avoided this little trace right here. They're all around it, but they've avoided this, which is really cool. Walking over to the edge of the arroyo and looking back to the southwest, we see this scene here. There's no cryptobiotic crust in here because this takes water, it's eroding. You just don't find cryptos in eroding places. But back a little bit further where the van is where that one section was that does have cryptos on it. Walking to the other side of the arroyo and looking back toward the south, you see where the trail comes in and where the arroyos cut it. In the MAT, Mapping Immigrant Trail Manual, I haven't found, this is where I would like to ask your help, I haven't found how to describe that point right there where an arroyo or a wash cuts the trail. There must be a term for that. Does anybody know what that term might be? It doesn't seem to be in the MET. What? What? Cut bank. Cut bank. Okay, cut bank. Okay, that's good. And what's interesting, the off-road vehicle community, they don't seem to want to come down and go off the edge right here. It's really interesting. Of course, all around there they got sand dunes and things like that that are more interesting than coming down this little pathway here and jumping into the arroyo. On the north side of the arroyo, what I just showed you, that's behind us now, and we're looking up to that upland where that trail goes. And you see this interesting picture right here. There's a lot of cryptobiotic crust in here. Look at that. It's really well camouflaged by the color of the rock. And that photograph I showed you that was the trace, and you can hardly see the cryptos. Here you can see the cryptos. And so there's two different species, I believe. One on one side of the arroyo and one on the other side of the arroyo, and this one here. And you can see a little bit of impact from off-road vehicles here. And looking back from that same point in the opposite direction, you can really see the impacts. The reason you can see these is because those tire tracks have smashed down cryptobiotic crust or biological crust, and that's why you can see them. It's otherwise fairly hard surface. And here's some intact cryptos. A lot of that trace has it fairly well intact. So now, when you guys get home and you go out on the trail, start looking, see what you can see out there. See what kind of get that PDF. See what kind of species you got. This is probably something we ought to be including in the mapping efforts. Begin to try to describe what's growing on the trail traces or the ruts. But that is probably 16th century, possibly an olive jar fragment. The Spaniards brought lots of olive jars, or that's from a flintlock right there. That's from a flintlock musket, and it is the same location as that ceramic. So that pretty much concludes what I'm talking about.